Kiln glass is a term that describes an enormous range of working methods and finished outcomes. This can include everything from simple platter-like forms, thin-walled vessels, and solid cast sculptures, to painterly panels, installations, and architectonic slabs. What all kiln glass has in common is that it is worked or formed in a special high-temperature oven called a kiln at some point during the process. Artists working with kiln glass include Klaus Moyet, who began to explore the painterly possibilities of working with bullseye sheet glass in the early 1980s. He has used as his canvas everything from wide-rimmed platter-like forms with gestural strokes of color to cylindrical vessels with energetic colors and patterns, to wall panels such as this untitled piece from 2006, which immediately engages the viewer as a work of contemporary art, both in scale and in content. His work has ranged from having a loose and gestural feel to a more ordered yet dynamic sensibility, to being relatively minimal, restrained, and almost flattened, to being full of rhythm, energy, and depth through the use of pattern and diagonal overlap. Moyet has been extremely innovative, both technically and aesthetically, not to mention influential. This influence is especially strong with the graduates of the program he started at the Canberra School of Art in Australia. These graduates include sculptor Richard Whiteley, who is the current head of the program that Moyet started. Whiteley's kiln-cast work harnesses the optical properties of glass and draws on the language of architecture, creating dialogue between solid and void in resonant works that allude to personal and psychological space. Another graduate of the school at Canberra is Jessica Laughlin. Her fused and slumped works from the late 1990s often consisted of contemplative platter forms like this, with clear reference to landscape and the use of a horizon line that remains characteristic of much of her work. As the work progressed, the forms became more elongated and the colors became more subtle and sophisticated, while the surfaces remained richly handled. Laughlin also makes wall works, this one showing not only a horizon line, but what might also be read as a thin strip of sun reflecting on an otherwise leaden sea. She has also taken these works into a more sculptural direction, creating freestanding boxes with subtly varied faces that inform one another through the hollow between them. In 2008, these began to take on a slightly more gestural quality, with some of the linear elements becoming more calligraphic and transitions becoming softer and more atmospheric. This painterly feel is perhaps even more pronounced in wall works, such as Awash 3. The cameo-engraved images of landscapes and figures by American artist April Sergeant create a rich sense of memory and silence. These works are visually stunning and move between being intensely detailed to more atmospheric and fragmentary. The printmaker Tom Prochaska has excelled at using crushed sheet glass frits and powders, along with threads of glass called stringers, as drawing media. In the head of this figure, for example, he used the lines of black glass as a printmaker might use crosshatching, while in other cases, such as the cigarette, he used line to describe contour. He also used grains of frit at the tip of the cigarette for the ash, to give the feeling of gravity with those bits falling from the end. Simultaneously, he used powders for the smoke and in the forearm to suggest a bit of shading and dimension. The variety of lines he has used, not one of them like the other, gives the work a sensibility difficult to achieve with uniform lines alone. In this piece, he used black stringers in the background to create a very simplified cityscape. It stands in contrast to the more gestural handling of the figure in the foreground, giving that figure an increased sense of psychological realism. In this work, he left traces of brushwork surrounding the figures, giving the piece a sense of movement and blurriness that would be absent had he cleared the smudges away. One of the great revelations of Prochaska's work is that while he exploits the material and working qualities of the glass, the subject matter is not glass itself. In this piece, he used the metaphorical qualities of the material to perhaps take sides in what appears to be a heated discussion. The discourse issuing from the figure on the left is clear and upwardly buoyant. That of the figure on the right is blackened and moving downward. Prochaska repeatedly draws our attention to the narrative and compositional rather than material qualities of the work. In this untitled piece about marriage and relationships, one can feel both the tension and the force of gravity on the cord that binds these tightrope walkers. Prochaska was introduced to working with kiln glass in this fashion by the Italian-born artist Narcissus Qualiata, who made this self-portrait in leaded glass in the 1980s. Composed of hundreds of pieces of meticulously sourced and hand-selected mouth-blown glass, the piece took months to complete. Qualiata, who had studied painting under Giorgio de Chirico in Rome, and Richard Diebenkorn and Elmer Bischoff in San Francisco, was looking for a way of working with glass that was much more immediate. He found it in working with bullseye, which allowed him to rapidly make works with a gestural and spontaneous quality, sometimes full of explosive energy and free of the lead lines that had previously constrained him. With the new materials, he could make works of tremendous fluidity and pursue monumental pieces such as Gateway into Night at 12 by 30 feet. Catherine Newell was also introduced to working with bullseye by Qualiata, and has used many of the same materials and methods to make her highly resolved and thoughtful explorations of the human figure. Often showing multiple views of the same subject, she questions the construction of identity and shows what might otherwise appear as mundane to be multifaceted. These simple portraits on sheet glass have been slumped in such a fashion that they appear to be crumpled up and windblown, a comment on the tenuous nature of memory, sense of place, and ultimately identity. Ted Sawyer also works with these same materials and methods, but in a more abstract manner. He creates works with richly textured surfaces and painterly layers of information that explore emotional responses to unexpected types of beauty. The Italian artist Maurizio Donzelli also works in a more abstract manner, creating works that often have a half-formed, almost schematic quality, which is precisely his intention. Much of Donzelli's work is explicitly about the act of translating perception into thought, or thoughts into images. The work is visually luscious and points out the tenuous connection between reality and perception by seeking to show us perceptions at the moment just before they crystallize. Another artist working in Italy is Sylvia Levinson, who uses kiln-cast glass to plumb a latent violence that can lie just beneath the surface of domesticity. In this piece, I See You're a Bit Nervous, a dinner setting with a fruit dish loaded with pink hand grenades. And in Are You Lonesome Tonight, she expresses her perplexity about the world and how the things in which we seek comfort may harm us. Mexican painter Rafael Cauduro also explores some unsettling territory and brings the illustrative virtuosity of his work in other media to kiln glass. He has made everything from fluidly rendered black and white drawings to massive slabs in which life-sized skulls emerge as if through a primordial ether, making direct reference to Mesoamerican Zompantli. Internationally known ceramic sculptor June Kaneko has worked with bullseye since 1998 to develop a voice in glass that is irrefutably his in scale, composition, palette, and content, that moves well beyond being a transcription of what he has done in ceramics and instead responds to the fundamental qualities of the material. He plays with the material's ability to appear rigid, or with proper engineering flowing, all the while exhibiting a sophisticated sense of order. He employs a deceptive simplicity on a scale rarely achieved in glass, as in translucent angle at 19 by 85 by 24 inches. He carefully considers, as a sculptor must, the relationship of a work to its surroundings, as in this curving wall that is roughly 7 feet high and over 36 feet long. Kaneko is not the only artist to bring such a sense of scale to works in kiln glass. Printmaker Martha Pfanschmidt has made, among other things, this series of multi-layered panels, forming a group of 4 floor-to-ceiling artworks. They are incorporated directly into the architecture of the Casey Building, a residential tower in northwest Portland. Pfanschmidt is not alone in putting work into architectural context. Artists and designers, such as Dan Daly, have been doing so for years. In this case, casting a series of panels for the door of a private residence in Palm Desert, California. Kiln glass can be used in myriad ways in an architectural context. These range from dividing walls, such as Bloom by Ellen George, and White Noise, designed by architect Brad Klopfel, to chandeliers such as the internal organs of Louis Daguerre by artist James Harrison, and Ada Carini by architect Stan Bowles. Not all artists aspire to work on this monumental scale. Mel George often works with intimate pieces, exploring issues of identity and belonging, and the things that bind people and places together. Sculptor and former ceramist Deborah Harrell uses pot de verre methods, typically employed for small works, to make sculptural groupings of objects with echoes of Giorgio Morandi, and larger solitary objects that sculpt light. Printmaker and sculptor Mark Zerpel also uses glass to sculpt light, exploring celestial and terrestrial phenomena in both moving and stationary works. There is almost no limit to the ways in which artists have explored the many possibilities presented by kiln glass. They include this sculpture by Steve Klein, this panel by Giles Bettison, a color-filled tapestry of shimmering beauty, this gate-like piece by Kirsty Ray, which evokes the colors of the land in which it might have been found, the wall-mounted relief sculptures of Nathan Sandberg, the graceful, boat-like forms of Kobe Coburn, the resonant minimalism of Charles Butcher, the commentary about suburban America of Eric Whittemore's work, the abnegation of the self-portraits of Australian Hamish Carr, the graffiti-like stencils of Eric Stodick, the unabashedly beautiful meditations on cellular structures of the Briton Steve Brown, the ghostly images of Carrie Iverson, and the graphic energy of works by Claudia Barella. What these pieces have in common is that all have been worked in the kiln, and like this Barella, all are made by artists who use bullseye.